After her father died in the middle of harvest, a lonesome cowboy finished the fields for free, and before winter ended, she became his wife. The sun was sinking behind the wheat fields when Eliza Wren pressed her trembling hand against the rough wood of her father's coffin. The crop still stood uncut, golden and heavy, mocking her loss. Every stalk was a reminder of promises she could no longer keep. The neighbors said she should sell the farm, take what little she could, and leave before the snow came. But Eliza had given her word to a dying man. "I won't lose what you built, Papa." She tried to keep that vow alone until the day a stranger rode up through the dust. Cole Maddox, a wounded drifter with quiet eyes and a limp that spoke of old pain. He offered to work for nothing but shelter, and together they fought the land, the weather, and the whispers of a town that said no woman should stand beside a man like him. Through storms, through hunger, through nights of doubt and prayer, the two strangers turned sorrow into strength. What began as duty became devotion. What started in grief grew into love. And when the last stalk of wheat fell beneath their hands, Eliza realized the man who saved her father's farm had also saved her heart. The Dakota plains stretched endlessly under a hard autumn sky, where wind moved like a living thing, cold, relentless, whispering through the tall wheat that still waited to be cut. The Wren farm sat on a gentle rise overlooking miles of golden fields, a lonely cabin framed by a leaning barn and the faint smoke of a dying hearth. Once, this land had echoed with her father's laughter and the creak of wagon wheels returning from market. Now, it was silent except for the sound of the wind and the weight of promises Eliza could no longer share with anyone. Each morning, she rose before dawn, pulling her father's coat around her shoulders, trying to look stronger than she felt. Her hands, soft once, were blistered and raw from the scythe. The wheat mocked her with its vastness. She could cut until her fingers bled and still make no mark on the horizon. In town, the talk had already begun. Some said the Wren girl was foolish to try. Others said she'd be married or bankrupt by Christmas. The banker's clerk had already ridden by twice, measuring the land with his eyes. That evening, when the storm clouds turned the sky the color of lead, Eliza stood on the porch and whispered into the wind, "I'll finish it, Papa, even if it kills me." Far down the road, a lone rider was coming, his silhouette dark against the dying Sunday. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the moaning wind like a heartbeat that refused to die. Eliza lifted her head, squinting into the late afternoon glare. A lone rider was approaching, his horse laboring up the hill toward her father's farm. The stranger sat tall in the saddle, his duster coat stained from the road, hat pulled low against the wind. When he reached the gate, he dismounted with a limp that spoke of pain long endured rather than weakness. "Ma'am," he greeted softly, voice rough as gravel but calm. "Name's Cole Maddox. I heard in town you might need help with your harvest." Eliza almost laughed at the cruel joke of it. "Help? The man who could save this harvest is buried right over that hill." She pointed toward the small rise where her father's grave marker caught the last light. Cole removed his hat, bowing his head in respect before looking back at her, green eyes steady beneath the brim. "Then maybe I'm just here to keep a promise for him," he said quietly. Something in his tone, neither pity nor pride, made her hesitate. The man looked tired, worn by the trail, but there was decency in his stance, something that reminded her of the world before everything broke. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Then don't," he replied. "Let me work till the wheat's in. You can pay me when the land does." Met. That night, as the sun fell behind the plains, Eliza watched him walk the field with the slow, sure gait of a man who belonged to hard places. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something stir inside her chest, the faintest breath of hope. The next morning broke like steel, cold, bright, unyielding. Eliza stood at the edge of the Wren field with Cole beside her, the wheat combing in the wind as if the land itself were breathing. He had taken the whetstone to an old cradle scythe and shown her how to angle the blade, how to keep her wrists loose so the stroke flowed rather than hacked. When he passed the tool back, his hands were steady, his eyes attentive, as if the harvest were a test he had studied for all his life. "Don't fight it," he said. "Let the stalks fall where they're told." "I'm listening," Eliza answered, though her palms were already raw from days of stubborn, unguided effort. She braced, swung, and felt the blade whisper through grain. The wooden fingers caught and laid the wheat cleanly. Not perfect, but better. Cole nodded once. Again. Well, they worked in a wordless rhythm, the day punctuated by small adjustments, his hand ghosting over her elbow to shift her balance, his boot gently nudging her stance, his drawled, "good," arriving so quietly it felt like a private blessing. And as the hours stretched, Eliza discovered that attention could be a kind of mercy. The land did not require brilliance, only steadiness. The blade asked for patience, not genius. By noon, clouds were gathering in low ranks along the western horizon. Cole glanced at the sky and frowned. 2 days from now, that's rain. We don't have 2 days, Eliza said. That's why we're starting early tomorrow, he replied. Before the town wakes to talk. He took off his hat to wipe his brow, and she caught sight of the thin scar over his right eye, old, clean, the sort men collected doing hard things they didn't brag about. They ate at the pump, elbows touching on the trough's edge, cold bread, hard cheese, a jar of last summer's peaches that tasted like a reprieve. When they finished, Cole rinsed the tin plates without being asked. Eliza tried not to notice that it felt like habit, as if he'd once belonged in a house where he wasn't allowed to take up space unless he first made himself useful. They went back to the wheat and cut until the light went thin and blue. Dusk brought the first visitors. A buckboard creaked up the lane, and Mr. Pitch, the bank's junior clerk, stepped down with a ledger tucked under one bony arm. He took in the neatly laid windrows, Cole's limp, Eliza's blistered hands, his narrow mouth curled. "Miss Wren," he said, tipping his hat as if politeness were a form of accounting, "the bank extends its sympathies on your loss. We'll need to speak about terms." Cole leaned the scythe against the fence and stood beside Eliza without a word. "We'll speak after the harvest," Eliza said. Pitch licked a finger and turned a page. "There are moneys due before then." Eliza felt heat rush to her cheeks. "This land was paid on time while my father lived. It will be paid again." Pitch's eyes slid to Cole. "I'm sure assistance can be found. But reputation is a kind of currency in a place like ours." He shut the ledger with a snap. "Sunday's collection plate has long memory." Cole's voice, when it came, was quiet. "You finished?" Pitch startled at the interruption, then gave Cole a look meant to put him back in his place. It didn't work. "I'll return," Pitch said to Eliza, climbing back into the seat. "The bank is patient, but winter is not." When the buckboard rattled away, Cole picked up the scythe. "He's smoke," he said. "Looks worse than he burns." Eliza blew out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Smoke still chokes. 1. They worked in silence until the sky added stars to the ledger of the day. At the pump, Cole tested his leg, rolling the ankle, setting the weight. Eliza saw pain flash across his face, brief, controlled, denied. "How bad?" she asked. "Manageable." "That isn't an answer." He glanced away. "Most pains are manageable if the work's worth it." She wanted to ask, what work was worth it before me? But the question felt too intimate for the dark and too dangerous for the light. The next morning they beat the sun to the field. Frost rimed the fence wire, and their breath smoked in the air. Cole sharpened the blade until it sang. Eliza wrapped rags around her palms and flexed her fingers, feeling both the ache of yesterday and the promise of today. They cut in long swaths, bound the bundles with twine, then propped the sheaves upright in little teepees so air could move through and keep the grain dry. By mid-morning, a black-tailed storm was drawing a line across the plains. The wind picked up. The wheat hissed. Cole quickened his pace, and Eliza followed, stroke for stroke. The scythe began to feel like an extension of her will, the field like a problem with an answer. "Drink," he ordered. "I can go another row." "Drink, Eliza." She took the tin cup because her name in his mouth felt like strength she could borrow. When she handed the cup back, their fingers brushed. Both pretended not to notice. The wind noticed, though. It drove a tumbleweed between them and laughed on. By noon, they had a good section laid and tied. Cole went to fetch the wagon. On his return, the front right wheel hit a rut and cracked with a shot like a pistol. The wagon lurched. Cole threw his weight to hold it, and his bad leg buckled. Eliza was at his side, shoulder under his arm, before the echo died. "Sit," she commanded. "Now, wheel." he gritted. "We need it upright before the clouds steal the afternoon." She gave him a glare that would have done a schoolmarm proud. "We need you upright more. Tell me what to do." Cole's jaw worked. He let her ease him onto the grass, then talked her through jacking the axle and scavenging a spare from the barn. Twice he tried to get up. Twice Eliza put a hand to his chest and said, "No." The third time he obeyed without arguing. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like respect. They got the spare on, loaded sheaves, and hauled them under cover as the first cold spits of rain began to prick the dust. By the time the barn doors thudded shut, Eliza's arms quivered with fatigue. Cole slid down the wall beside the wagon wheel, breath harsh. "Boot," he said. "Can you pull? Slow." She knelt. The leather was worn thin at the ankle and mended with careful stitches. She worked the boot free and saw swelling already taking hold, purple fog blooming under the skin. A memory flashed. Her father's knee after a fall off the hayloft. How she had wrapped it while he made jokes to keep her from crying. "Cold," she said, and ran to the pump. She filled a pail, grabbed a rag, and returned. Cole watched her without complaint as she pressed the chilled cloth to the joint. His jaw unclenched. "Thank you. You're not allowed to break," she said lightly, so the fear in her chest wouldn't show. "I hired you for your legs." "You didn't hire me," he said. "You let me stay." He tipped his head back against the wood and closed his eyes. "There's a difference." The rain built into a steady drumming, then into a proper downpour that swallowed the farm in gray. Trapped by the storm, they sorted the sheaves already cut, turning what they could by lamplight, keeping the barn tidy in ways only the experienced bothered to try. Work that looked like fussing until winter proved it had been wisdom. Mid-afternoon brought a second visitor. Mrs. Lou Avery, the rancher's wife from the South Road, flew in like a gale in a plaid shawl, track of wet boot prints behind her. "Eliza Wren," she cried. "I came to see if you needed, oh." She stopped, taking in Cole at the workbench with the grinding wheel, sleeves rolled, hands black with oil. "You found help." Eliza kept her chin level. "This is Mr. Maddox. He's working the field." "And the barn," Lou said, eyes crinkling. "And likely the stove if you let him." She looked toward the rain. "Good. A woman can be strong and still take the help that comes honest." She set a pie on the bench with the air of someone delivering provisions on a battlefield. "Blueberry. I brought a second for the preacher's table in case you want a guest Sunday." Tongues wag less when the Reverend has pie to occupy them. Eliza flushed, glancing at Cole. He was careful to keep his expression blank, but she could see the humor in his eyes. "Thank you," Eliza managed. Lou drew her in for a brief, crushing hug that smelled like flour and horses. At the door she paused. "Mr. Maddox," she said over her shoulder, "if any man in town tries to make trouble, send him to my porch first." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said gravely, and Lou left as abruptly as she'd come, a gust of kindness fleeing back into the rain. When the storm finally wandered off toward Missouri, evening had its way with the light. Cole tested his leg again. He could stand on it, but not well. Eliza insisted he take the loft in the barn, not the floor. He argued once. She pointed to the latter. He went. In the house, Eliza set the blueberry pie on the table and stared at it until the fatigue caught up. She blew out the lamp and slept 3 hours sitting up, face on her folded arms, tasting sugar in a dream of summer. The next day dragged bright and brittle. The field lay flattened in places, windrows kicked out of their neat lines, but the damage was not ruin. Cole permitted himself a quarter smile when he saw the sheaves they'd propped, still standing like little tents against the night. "Could have been worse," he said. "It will be worse," Eliza replied, scanning the horizon. "Those clouds are just the scouts, the armies behind them." They set to rights what the wind had bullied, then returned to cutting. Cole favored his right leg but did not complain. Eliza watched him the way one watches a candle in a draught, ready to cup her hands if the flame wavered. By mid-afternoon, 3 riders appeared at the fence line. Eliza recognized one. Ward Harlan, foreman for the big Cedar Ridge spread, a man whose hat brim seemed permanently bent by scowls. He dismounted with the confidence of someone sure his boots improved any ground they touched. "Miss Wren," Ward said, eyes skittering over the field, The scythe, the man beside her. "We heard you were in a bind." "I'm in a field," Eliza said. "The bind we're saving for sheaves." Ward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Cedar Ridge could take this place off your hands clean. Cash now. You won't have to break your back fighting winter for a losing cause." "It isn't losing," she said. "It is if you're still standing here when the snow flies." He glanced at Cole. "You hire drifters. You get driftwood looks useful until it snaps." The men behind him chuckled. Cole's shoulders didn't move, but something sharpened in his gaze. "We aren't buying or selling today," he said. "We're cutting. You ride back to your boss. Tell him the same." Ward's glance flicked to Cole's limp. "You've got 2 weeks' work and one good leg between you," he said to Eliza, not even bothering to mask the contempt. "Deal stands until the first frost. After that, it gets less friendly." Eliza held his stare until he looked away first. "You have your answer." Ward clicked his tongue, like spurring a mule. "So be it." They mounted and rode off, kicking up little sarcastic puffs of dust. When they'd gone, Eliza looked at Cole. "You're not driftwood." He gave her that quarter smile again. "No. I'm the nail somebody lost and somebody else had to make do with." He tapped the scythe. "Get me to the field and I hold." "Jess." They cut another acre by sheer stubbornness. When the light failed, Eliza lit the lamp and they repaired harness in the barn. Cole showed her a cowboy's knot that could be undone in a hurry when a loop turned bad. She practiced until she could tie it with her eyes closed. He watched, a quiet pride in the way his mouth shaped itself around stillness. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked softly. "Places where the difference between neat and sloppy is 3 seconds before a steer crushes you," he said. "Places where nobody waits to see if you're worth saving." She opened her mouth, then shut it. He had given her a piece of the map to his life. To press for more would be to set foot where she was not yet invited. Sunday came clear and sharp, with a wind that carried the smell of ice from the high country. Eliza wore a dark blue dress that had been her mother's and pinned her hair with a tortoiseshell comb that always made her think of steady hands and soft humming. They met the preacher on the church steps. He was a kindly man whose eyes seemed full of weathered fields and wide skies. "Miss Wren," he said, squeezing her fingers. "Good to see you in the Lord's house." "Ma." "Good to be here," Eliza lied gently. She felt seen and measured and pitied in equal measure under the weight of the town's glances. Cole stood one step behind and to the side, hat in his hands, as if he knew how to be present without tempting censure. After the service, Preacher Rowan took Cole's hand in both of his and said, "We judge a tree by its fruit. Your work out there looks like good fruit to me." "Trying," Cole said. "Keep trying," the preacher answered. "The Lord loves men who try." Lou Avery intercepted them with 2 meat pies and a conspiratorial whisper, "Eat while it's hot. Gossip goes cold if you ignore it." Eliza almost laughed. Almost. Back at the farm, they ate in comfortable silence. The quiet stretched until it frayed. Cole cleared his throat. "If I stay through threshing," he said, eyes on the crust he was breaking, "there's a thing I'd ask." Eliza's heart thumped. "Ask." "Let me fix your roof first." "North side. I've watched the way your stovepipe leans when the wind hits just so." She exhaled a laugh she hadn't planned. "I thought you were about to say something else." His eyes lifted. Something passed across his face like the shadow of a hawk. "Not yet," he said. "The roof first." "Then the fence," she said, taking the jest and hiding inside it. "Then the fence," he agreed. And for the first time she saw on him not just the grit of a man who endured, but the gentle craft of a man preparing to belong. The storm arrived on a Wednesday. It came hard and sudden, shouldering the ridges and falling in a slate curtain that erased the world beyond the barn. The first gust tore a strip of shingles from the house roof. The second set the wheat to writhing like a troubled sea. Cole and Eliza ran for the field with tarps under their arms, rain drilling their faces, boots sucking at the mud. They went from shock to shock, batting canvas into place, tying twine with fingers that had forgotten warmth. Twice the wind ripped a tarp from their hands and threw it angrily toward Nebraska. Twice they chased it, laughing a little, because if they didn't, they would cry. A sudden crack like bone, Eliza turned. The little cottonwood by the pump had tried to bow and broken for its trouble. Lightning snarled in the clouds. Cole grabbed Eliza's wrist. "Barn!" he shouted into the gale. They ran bent double, shoulders pressed together, human as fence posts and just as stubborn. Inside the barn, the noise softened from scream to roar. Cole slammed the doors and threw the bar. Eliza stood with her hands on her knees, lungs burning, rain slicking her hair to her scalp. They looked at each other, two animals caught in the same brief cave, and laughed, because the choice was laughter or terror. Cole's hair dripped into his eyes. He wiped a sleeve across his face and stepped closer, scanning her quickly in inventory for injuries. "You good?" "I'm good." The words surprised her. They were true. She felt wrung out and alive, like a bell that had been struck and hadn't yet stopped ringing. He reached for the nearest lantern, found the matchbox by touch, and coaxed flame onto wick. The light spilled over them, soft, golden, indecently warm against the world's gray fury. The barn smelled of fresh-cut grain and horses and the ghost of summer. The door shuddered in its frame. Eliza flinched. Cole's hand found hers without ceremony, a worker passing a tool. He squeezed once steady now and would have let go, but she did not. They stood like that while the wind hurled itself at their walls and failed. Minutes, or a lifetime, later, the storm staggered into a sullen rain. Cole tilted his head toward the ladder. "Fire in the house," he said. "Dry clothes, soup, order." "Roof," Eliza objected. "Fire first," he said, a smile ghosting the corner of his mouth. "Then roof. We'll keep the Lord from sending us another preacher with pie." They made a dash for the house. Inside, Eliza fed kindling to a hungry stove, while Cole stripped off his wet shirt and wrung it out on the porch, muscles jumping in the cold. She noticed, and then tried not to notice, and then gave up on not noticing. Because whatever this life was, it did not include pretending she hadn't seen beautiful things. Soup became its own kind of sacrament. They ate at the little table with the rain soft on the windows, and the future pressed up against the rim of their bowls. When the last spoon scraped, Cole set his utensil down and sat back, thoughtful. "There's a piece of truth I owe you," he said. Eliza's chest tightened. "All right." He stared at his hands, at the little nicks and scars that told his story better than words. "I wasn't just passing," he said at last. "Not exactly. A year ago, your father pulled a man out of trouble that wasn't his. He didn't say much about it. Just poured coffee and gave advice. People do worse things with their breath." Cole looked up. His eyes were green as winter wheat under cloud. "I heard when he passed. I heard about you and the field. I told myself I was headed north anyway. But that wasn't all of it. I came to square a debt. To him. Maybe to myself." Eliza felt the whole room tilt, and then steady. Pain and gratitude rode the same wind in her. "You could have told me. I thought you wouldn't let me help," he said simply. "I thought you'd hear charity when I said respect." She took a breath, tasting smoke and time and some new salt from her own eyes. "I hear you now." They did not move toward each other. They didn't have to. The closeness arrived anyway, like weather. The clock on the shelf ticked robustly, as if to chaperone them. Outside, the last stubborn raindrops gave up their argument with the eaves. Cole stood and reached for his hat. "Roof," he said. "Before the temperature drops." They worked until their fingers went numb and the shingles obliged. When the last nail was set, Cole stood back and surveyed the line of the roof with a craftsman's satisfaction. "That'll hold till spring," he said. He looked down at Eliza, who had tar on her cheek and triumph in her smile. "So will you." "Yeah." That night, she slept like someone who had found the edge of a shore after swimming too long in cold water. In her dream, wheat bowed under a wind that chose to be gentle. Winter's breath came sooner than the almanac promised. Every morning bled light late. Every evening stole it early. They pushed through fatigue like soldiers through snow. When Eliza's hands split, Cole wrapped them in liniment and gauze, cussing softly not at her, but at the world for daring to hurt what he had come to care for. When Cole's limp worsened, Eliza took the scythe, and he bound the sheaves, and nothing was said about shame, because there was none to say. Neighbors trickled in with help that tried not to look like help. A coil of rope left behind in a wagon, a sack of flour spare, A half-day's labor from a man who claimed his cows were bored and needed to watch people work. And all the while the banker's clerk rode past, a crow pretending he brought news. The day the sun returned clean and cold, they cut the last tall stand of grain. Eliza felt it before she saw it, the shift in Cole's breathing, the way his strokes slowed, the way the world pulled itself into a single narrow point of purpose. Finish this row, finish this day, finish this promise. At the final sweep, the blade whispered, and the wheat sighed and fell. Silence rose like heat. Cole lowered the scythe and leaned on it, every line of him spent. Eliza tied the last bundle with fingers she could not feel. She set it upright and stepped back. The field around them was a quilt of stubble, the work of grief turned into the order of survival. Cole's voice came hoarse, revert. "It's ein." Eliza looked at him. Mud masked his boots, and straw clung to his hair, and fatigue made a stranger of his face except for the eyes, which were the same as the first day. Steady, steady, steady. Something in her broke and healed in the same breath. "Cole," she said softly, "because a name is a place to set down a heavy thing. Thank you." "Rose." He shook his head, a small, stubborn refusal. "You don't owe me words." "I owe you the truth," she said. The wind lifted the hair at her temples, and then let it go. "You were the only person who stepped in without asking to own what you saved." He opened his mouth, then shut it. He seemed to test the weight of silence, and decide it was more silver than tin. The sun slid lower, gilding the stubble. The first geese of the season sounded overhead, pulling a ragged V across the sky. Eliza felt the future shift again, not a threat this time, but a room with a window cracked for air. "Threshing next," Cole said, because life refused to end neatly where stories wanted. "Then sail. Then the bank." She nodded. They walked toward the barn shoulder to shoulder, not touching, and yet something in their strides had learned how to match. At the door, Cole paused. "There's a promise I haven't made yet," he said, "because I won't make it cheap. But I'm close." "Lead." Eliza felt her heart strike the inside of her ribs. "All right. Let me finish what your father started," he said. "Let me carry it into the kind of winter a man and a woman can live through." He met her gaze with a steadiness that felt like a hand held out over rushing water. "Then I'll ask you the question that's been burning a hole in my coat since the day I picked up that scythe." Her mouth went dry. Hope moved through her like a shy animal deciding whether to step from the brush. "I'll be ready," she said. Outside, the wind changed. Not much. Just enough to smell snow coming down from the high line. It smelled like endings that could become beginnings if somebody got brave in time. "Tomorrow," Cole said. "Tomorrow," Eliza echoed, and the word felt like a vow both of them could keep. By dawn the next day, frost glimmered on the wheat stubble like the land itself had turned to glass. The air bit sharper than before, that kind of chill that warned the first snow was not far behind. Eliza stepped outside with her shawl drawn tight, watching a thin wisp of smoke curl from the barn chimney. Cole was already awake. He always was. She found him seated on a stool by the open barn door, sharpening the scythe one last time. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. "We did it," she said quietly, her breath visible in the cold. Cole looked up. "We did," he agreed, "but the hard part's just starting." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "The bank'll come calling before the week's out. They'll want their payment. And they'll want to remind you that grief don't buy extensions." He set down the whetstone and flexed his fingers. "That harvest you worked yourself raw for it needs to sell high, or none of this will hold." Eliza knew he was right. They had cut and bound every stalk, but the wheat still sat in the barn waiting for the buyer from Fargo who might never come. And if the snow fell before the wagons rolled out, the road would be lost until spring. She took a slow breath. "Then we wait and pray." "Vow." Cole nodded, but his expression said he had little faith in prayers, or maybe too much experience with ones that went unanswered. That afternoon, the storm they'd smelled in the wind finally arrived. It came not with rain this time, but with sleet and snow, stinging needles that turned the world white. Cole and Eliza rushed to seal the barn doors, cover the wagons, and drag every last bundle of wheat under shelter. The wind howled like a living thing, furious at being kept out. When it was over, the sky was pale and silent. the farm buried beneath a thin crust of snow. Cole limped toward the house, his breath ragged. "Inside," Eliza ordered, noticing the strain in his movements. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his face was gray with pain. "Inside," she repeated. "That's an order." He tried to protest again, but she caught his arm and pulled him through the doorway. His weight against her felt both heavy and familiar, a burden she no longer minded carrying. By the fire, she knelt beside him, unwrapping the ragged cloth around his leg. The swelling had returned, angry and deep purple. "You've torn it again," she said, angry at him and at fate. "You can't keep." "I didn't plan to stay idle," Cole interrupted softly. "Not while there's work left." She met his gaze, fierce and unflinching. "You've done enough, Cole. You saved this farm. You saved me." He shook his head. "No, Eliza. I just helped you remember you were never the one who needed saving." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked and hissed, and the sound of the storm faded into memory. Then Eliza said quietly, "You talk like a man who's leaving." Cole didn't answer. He looked toward the window, where the snow fell in lazy spirals. "There's a buyer passing through tomorrow," he said instead. "If the price holds, it'll be enough to clear the debt. After that," he hesitated, "after that, I reckon I'll move on." Her stomach turned to ice. "Move on? I came here owing your father a debt. Once it's paid, I've no right to linger." "Mun." Eliza rose slowly, arms crossed, voice trembling with anger that wasn't anger at all. "You think this was about a debt? You think I worked beside you every day because I needed a man's charity?" Cole flinched. "No." "Then stop talking like it." Her voice cracked. "You came because he believed you were an honest man. You stayed because you are one. But don't tell me this was just about a promise. That's not the truth, and you know it." "One." He looked at her a long moment, eyes dark, with something between shame and longing. "I don't deserve to start something I can't finish." "Then stop running from things you already started," she shot back. The silence that followed was heavy as snowfall. Finally, Cole said quietly, "You sound just like your father. Then maybe you should listen to me like you listened to him." The buyer arrived the next morning, a hard-eyed man named Leland Price, wrapped in a wool coat and arrogance. He climbed down from his wagon, surveyed the stacked wheat, and smirked. "Good yield," he said, "but you'll be lucky to get half the going rate. The roads are closing, and I'm the only one headed north before winter." Eliza's stomach sank. Half the rate wouldn't even cover the banknote. "That's robbery," Cole said evenly. "Call it what you like," Price shrugged. "You can take it or watch it rot." Eliza opened her mouth to argue, but Cole's hand landed lightly on her shoulder, steadying, warning. He stepped forward, voice calm. "Let's see your coin, friend. Half the rate in cash, you said." Price's grin faltered. I deal in notes." Cole tilted his head. "Then you deal elsewhere." The man blustered, threatening to take his offer to Cedar Ridge. But Cole's silence was colder than the wind. In the end, Price left, cursing under his breath, wheels creaking away toward the horizon. Eliza stared after him, half in awe, half in despair. "We could have lost everything." "We still might," Cole said. "But better that than lose it cheap." 2 days passed. The sky stayed low and gray. No new buyer came. Each morning Eliza checked the road, praying for movement on the horizon. Each night, she found Cole sitting by the window, carving something small from a block of pine, his hands restless, when his heart was troubled. "What are you making?" she asked once. He smiled faintly. "Something to leave behind." "Don't talk like that," she whispered. But he did not answer, and the knife kept moving, the soft scrape filling the silence between them. On the 4th day, just before dusk, hoofbeats echoed again. This time it was Preacher Rowan, hat pulled low, face flushed from the cold. "Bad news, Miss Wren," he said as he dismounted. "The bank's sending Pitch with papers tomorrow. He means to foreclose if the payment isn't made by sundown." Eliza felt her knees weaken. "We don't have the money yet." Rowan's face softened. "I know, child. But the Lord moves strange ways." He glanced toward Cole, sometimes through men who don't know they're being used for it. The preacher left as quickly as he came, leaving behind only the echo of his words. Cole sat silent for a long while after. Then he rose, walked to the small trunk by his cot, and opened it. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment and a leather pouch heavy with coins. "What is that?" Eliza asked. "Money," he said simply, "saved from years on the trail. It was meant for Oregon land." "You can't." "I can." He met her eyes. "And I will." Eliza shook her head, tears burning hot. "Cole, this isn't right. That's your future." He smiled, tired, gentle. "Maybe. But what kind of future would it be, knowing I left yours to die?" She stepped forward, trembling. "You'd trade everything for me?" He hesitated only a second. "I already did, Eliza." Pitch arrived the next evening, smug and certain, his ledger gleaming like a weapon. Eliza met him at the door, chin high, Cole at her side. "Miss Wren," Pitch said, drawing out the words like honey gone sour. "Unless you have the full amount, I'm afraid." She reached into the pouch and dropped a stack of silver dollars on the table. The sound rang like gunfire. Pitch blinked. "That how?" "It's paid," Eliza said, "in full." Cole folded his arms. "You can tell your boss the Wren land stays Wren land." Pitch's expression curdled. "I'll be sure to report, accurately." He snapped the ledger shut and left without another word. When the door closed, Eliza turned to Cole, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. "You just saved my home." He smiled faintly. "Your father's home." She stepped closer. "No, Cole. Ours." That night, the snow returned, softer this time. Eliza found him outside by the barn, staring across the white-dusted fields. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." She joined him in silence. The moonlight gleamed on the wheat bundles stacked high, proof that promises could be kept. "Why Oregon?" she asked after a long pause. He sighed. "Because it was far. Because it was somewhere I hadn't broken anything yet. And now? Now I don't want far," he said quietly. "I want here, but I don't know if I've earned it." Eliza looked at him, the firelight from the house glinting off his face. "You've earned more than this land ever gave anyone." She reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the little carving he'd been working on. It was a wheat stalk, delicate, imperfect, beautiful. "Then stay," she whispered. He turned to face her fully. The snow fell thick between them, blurring the world until it was only their breath and the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Neither do I," she replied, "but we'll find out together." And when she leaned forward and kissed him, it wasn't desperate or fleeting. It was the quiet, certain kind of love that grows out of shared labor and unspoken faith, the kind that holds even through the storms. At sunrise, the world was gold again. The buyer from Fargo arrived after all, offering a fair price that doubled what Price had mocked days earlier. Eliza's debts were gone, the land secure, the barn full of promise. When Cole hitched the last wagon for delivery, Eliza walked to him, holding the little wooden stalk he'd carved. "Keep this," she said, "so you'll remember what you built." He took her hand, rough and warm. "Only if you'll remember who built it with me." "Okay. I couldn't forget if I tried." As he climbed onto the wagon seat, she asked softly, "You coming back?" He paused, the morning light catching in his eyes. "If there's still work to be done." "There always is," she said. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both farewell and a promise. Then he clicked the reins and rode off toward the horizon, the wheat glowing behind him like a field of fire. Eliza stood watching until he vanished from view, the wooden carving pressed tight in her palm. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She simply whispered to the wind, "I'll be here, Cole, when you come home." Spring came late that year, as if the world itself had been holding its breath for one more miracle. The snows melted slow, bleeding silver down the gullies and into the creek that ran along the back of the Wren land. Shoots of green began to push through the thawed soil, small and stubborn the same way hope returns after a hard winter. Eliza stood on the porch in her father's old coat, watching the sky turn from slate to blue. The fields were ready again, and she'd already begun to prepare them, though she could still feel the echo of Cole's hands guiding hers through each motion. Every corner of the farm still bore his mark, the repaired roof that no longer leaked, the fence he'd rebuilt, the scythe he'd sharpened until it sang. But the space beside her, the silence at dusk, the empty chair by the fire, those were his too. She told herself he'd done the sensible thing, that men like him weren't meant to stay tethered. The trail called them the way the sea calls sailors. Still, each day when the sun began to sink, she found herself glancing toward the ridge road, half hoping to see a horse crest the horizon. Weeks passed. The wheat sprouted tall again. Pale and young under the new Sunday life moved, quiet and deliberate. Then, one evening, as Eliza was bringing in the last of the laundry, a familiar sound broke the calm. Hoofbeats, slow but steady, echoing against the hills. Her heart froze, then raced. She turned. Cole Maddox rode through the twilight like he'd never left. His hat was dusted from the trail, his coat patched, but his smile hesitant, tired, and full of something unspoken was exactly as she remembered. Eliza stood rooted to the porch as he dismounted. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them carried everything words could ruin. Finally he said, "You've done well. I had a good teacher." He looked at the wheat, then at her. "I sold the horses, bought seed and tools, and—" he reached into his saddlebag and drew out a folded parchment, the deed to a neighboring plot of land. "Figured if a man wants to stay, he ought to build something of his own, next to the person who gave him reason to." Eliza's breath caught. "You're staying?" Cole nodded slowly. "If you'll have me." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then the tension that had been wound in her chest since winter finally broke. She crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him, the scent of dust and leather and home filling her lungs. "You fool," she whispered against his shoulder. "You could have just said yes months ago." He laughed softly, holding her close. "Wasn't sure I deserved to." "You do," she said simply. "You always did." They married that spring in the same little church where her father once prayed for rain and mercy. The townsfolk came, some out of love, some out of curiosity, all softened by the sight of the woman who had refused to surrender and the man who had chosen to stay. Preacher Rowan read the vows in his steady voice, and when he said, "What God joins on the soil of honest work, let no man tear apart," there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Cole's hands trembled slightly when he slipped the simple silver band onto Eliza's finger. "From the start," he whispered, "even when I didn't know it." Eliza smiled through her tears. "And I'll hold you to forever." When the service ended, the doors opened onto sunlight so bright it seemed heaven itself was leaning closer to listen. The crowd followed them out into the open air, where the wheat shimmered in the distance, already whispering of another harvest. Cole lifted his hat and turned to her. "Ready for another season?" Eliza grinned, eyes shining. "With you, always." And as the music and laughter rose behind them, they walked hand in hand toward the fields that had first bound them together, two silhouettes framed against the endless gold, a pair of hearts that had weathered loss, debt, and distance only to find that love, like wheat, always finds a way to grow again. Years later, the Wren Maddox farm had become more than a patch of land. It was a promise kept. The once weary soil now breathed with life, rows of golden wheat bowing in the summer wind like old friends greeting each sunrise. The barn stood proud with a new red coat of paint, and the house, once leaning with grief, now glowed with the laughter that drifted through its windows. Eliza stood on the porch one afternoon, her hands dusted with flour, watching two small figures chase each other across the yard. Thomas, with his father's green eyes, ran ahead, while little Clara, stubborn and bright as her mother, clutched a stalk of wheat like a trophy. Cole followed behind, slower now, the old limp still there but softened by time and peace. He scooped both children into his arms, and their laughter carried clear across the fields. "Dinner's ready," Eliza called, though she waited a moment longer just to watch them, to fix that image deep inside her heart. The man who once rode in from nowhere, now rooted in the life they had built together. That night, after the children were asleep, she and Cole sat by the fire, their fingers intertwined. The walls around them bore reminders of their journey, the wooden wheat carving he'd made in that hard winter, the wedding photo taken beneath the same oak where her father once sharpened his scythe. Cole glanced toward the mantel and smiled. "You kept everything," he said softly. "I keep what matters," Eliza replied. He kissed her hand, rough skin against rough skin, and whispered, "We did it, Eliza. Your father's land, your dream, it's all here." She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. "It's not just his anymore," she murmured. "It's ours and theirs. U7. Outside, the night wind rolled over the fields, carrying the scent of grain and rain and the quiet hum of a future still unfolding. Years from now, when travelers passed along the ridge road, they'd see the golden stretch of the Maddox farm and hear the story told in every town nearby, how a farmer's daughter and a broken cowboy turned one last harvest into a lifetime. And when the wheat ripened each autumn, Eliza would stand at the porch, lift her face to the wind, and whisper the words that had begun it all. "It's done.